Aujourd'hui, je vais parler de how much cash you should have on hand when you retire. Hopefully retire early, a la fire, right? Hey, XenPuck here. I think I already made a clip about how much cash I think, how much trash I think cash actually is. I'm not sure how popular that opinion is, but today's topic is a follow-up to that one, okay? So how much cash should someone actually have, especially when we're about to fire? Obviously, I know my own answer because I've already reached that step a few years ago, but this isn't just about me, right? But also why I think I made my decision as to that level of cash, right? Everybody else's, of course, is different, so I'll list some criteria to consider other than simply the cash amount, right? If you enjoy these tips or tricks or whatnot, please subscribe, comment, like, and share, and all that social media buzzwords. Or not. I don't really care. I'll be great regardless. Now, point number one. At the low end, keep at least a year's worth of expenses. I think this is pretty standard, especially when you yourself is about to no longer have a regular paycheck coming in, right? I know for me, it was absolutely totally weird to feel like all of a sudden my income dropped by like 80%. That does not feel good, I can tell you that. Of course, that bad feeling is balanced by the good feeling that I no longer have to commute to a job that I was mostly yawning through anyway. So that's a plus. Still, before ever pulling that plug, I always suggest spending at least the previous year meticulously simply recording what you actually spend on a day-to-day basis, right? Tally that up at the end of every month for 12 whole months leading up to your fire date. And if your projected future non-active income without a job can relatively easily cover that, then you're prepared to retire, right? You do need passive income, okay? To be honest, the cash reserve is not really usually meant to be used as your actual first year's worth of expenses, unless you're very, very risk tolerant and is okay with simply living off capital gains, right? That wasn't me, okay? But that's also a viable strategy. In that case, though, you do definitely then need a year's worth of expenses, so long as you're sure your post-retirement expenses, your projected expenses, is actually accurate, right? That's very important because without a regular paycheck, well, it's just more troublesome to deal with any sudden expense shocks, right? Examples would be like if you needed replacing your laptop or your phone or your car or your HVAC in your home. Anything, whatever you think is relatively high cost by your own estimation. Okay. Number two, scenario two. On the higher end, I've heard people say, oh, you should have 5 years of living expenses saved up. And frankly, I do get why this amount is quoted, right? This amount is quoted because that's how long it usually takes for a market correction or downturn to turn itself around. So if you had 5 years worth of cash, you wouldn't have to sell stocks during a downturn, thus saving yourself from the double whammy of seeing your net worth go down, womp womp, and actually realizing those losses from paper losses to actual losses. The problem with 5 years worth of living expenses is simply that it could be a lot of cash, right? Depending on how much your expenses are, this may represent a good chunk of your capital that's not really doing much work, so it's like lazy money. I mean, let's be clear. Cash here just means cash equivalent, right? You can still put it into high yield savings or even maybe a CD ladder, since you have a 5-year time frame and you're unlikely to be needing all 5 years worth of cash in any particular 1 year, right? The point remains, if your expenses are very low, I'd say, sure, go for it. Take your lean fire number, multiply it by 5 and keep that on hand, because as long as it's 5x lean expenses, that implies most of your or more of your capital is still doing the thing that capitalism is meant to do, which is grow with the economy over time. But at no point would I recommend keeping 5x fat fire goals as we may have, because frankly, 5x annual expenses that are it's meant to stave off hard times, right? In the market. If the market is really going through a recession or depression, most people in the fire community would just tighten their spending anyway. After all, if we were the blingy show-off types, then the chances of us making it to fire would be abysmally low, okay? This just wouldn't have happened. Final point, I will mention one caveat here. Mostly we talked about how much cash to keep on hand if you're invested mostly in the market with your capital, right? My exception is that if you generate most of your post-retirement income via rentals, and that's been regular and steady for a while, I'd say there's less need for cash to cover your regular expenses. That's because with real estate, you gain in regularity of income, avoid comparative volatility, but in exchange for that, you get less diversification, most likely a more active type of work to be a landlord, and you're more regionally and market dependent, so may experience less reliable long-term growth, right? However, rents also do not drop very quickly outside of, like a COVID, once in a century type of pandemic situation. And even now, major city rents are looking to have stabilized or recovered already after just a year or two. My point is, if you have any really reliable and steady stream of predictable income, rentals are just the best example. And those cover your expenses, then you can once again treat your cash on hand as only a really short midterm emergency fund, right? Now the caveat on top of that caveat is, of course, I am not personally a high-level rental landlord, so I can only speak to how much of an emergency fund you should have for regular living expenses, right, as opposed to your rental-related type of emergency expenses. After all, let's say if you have more than 10 properties, the likelihood that any one of those properties might need some sizable repairs in any single given year is much higher than most people would experience if they only have a single primary residence. Right? So, in conclusion, I retired when I was young enough to still want to be risky, so I never had more cash on hand than what I would consider my relatively lean single year worth of expenses. Right? And that's also because I still have a low level predictable rental income to cover my leanest of lifestyle already, right? So kind of like my point 1 and point 2 added together. All the rest of my income from dividends rebalancing resulting in some level of capital gains, those are just icing on the cake, right? I always want my money to be working for me even further because I know just because I'm retired does not mean that I don't still have even higher financial goals. The difference is to reach my higher goals, I don't have to really be taking big risks because I've already seen what works because it's gotten me where I am today. And I know you need money to make more money. So keep as much cash as your risk tolerance will allow, really, or as little cash, I should say, right? Hopefully that's not too much cash, okay? Cheers, a la prochaine.